and we move from there. And so I would disagree with some colleagues who are saying that here we float an idea and then select committees spend... Oh.
The member's time has expired.
Oh, thank you very much.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker,
I'm tempted not to call a member given those recent...
look, I do apologise for that spontaneous expression of mirth, sir, but it has been quite amusing seeing members opposite, many of whom I certainly like as people, turning themselves inside out to find reasons to vote against motherhood, the apple pie and the environment. This bill is, quite frankly, beyond argument common sense. Not only is it common sense, but it actually represents what National says they believe in. They say they're Liberal Conservatives, they say they have the environment at heart, they say they want to bring the environment and the economy closer together. Well, here is a bill that actually does that. I commend the member who's introduced it. More on that in a second. Here's a bill that uses the Crown Accounts, financial analysis and objective data collection not to pick winners, not to prescribe policy, but simply to provide a common data set that is fact-based. Who actually but Donald Trump could object to such a thing? And distinguished members opposite who have clearly been given very interesting writing instructions. Please don't dump too hard on the bill because the Blue-Greens will be upset. Make it sound like you like it, but then refuse to send it even as far as a select committee because we wouldn't want you to actually engage in the substance lest some of it sneak through. And it was actually Mr Foss, Craig Foss, bless him, who displayed the kind of honesty that has become his hallmark to his detriment, because he came to the punchline. We do not want to get in the way of financial imperatives. We don't want environmental indicators going anywhere near the Crown financial accounts. That's the truth of it. The Labor light argument of giving half a loaf like they did on paid parental leave, or the head in the sand defence, which is if you don't measure it, it won't matter, like child poverty. Neither of those work in this case. And in this case, sir, we're at the nub of the argument. Why would you want environmental indicators sitting alongside GDP? We won't do away with GDP. We've made clear that. It's because if you think about GDP, it doesn't tell you the whole story. The single biggest boost to New Zealand GDP in the last century was what? Can members opposite say? The single biggest boost. It wasn't tourism, it wasn't dairy, it was the Christchurch earthquakes. A $30 billion GDP injection. It's just that hundreds of people lost their lives and our second biggest city was flattened. It was a disaster. But it was a huge GDP uptick. A war is a great GDP uptick. But it's nonsense to suggest that a war or an earthquake represents what's best in our life. We need to balance raw GDP, which is simply a measure of turnover, with things which talk about quality, sustainability, which integrate the long term and the short. Mr Speaker, a little sense of déjà vu, if I can say to the member. When I was in my first term, I negotiated a member's bill called the Triple Bottom Line Reporting Bill. And I was negotiating with then the Minister of Finance. The good member was also a finance minister, the Speaker. And Dr Michael Cullen said, look, rather than put a complex member's bill in front of the House, let's, as a matter of policy, instruct the Treasury to start working on these. And it's been pleasing to see a number of those pieces of work flow through to what is listed in the bill as current products of the Treasury and the Department of Statistics. How bizarre it was to hear members opposite list amongst their reasons for paying lip service to the bill but not even supporting it in the Select Committee that they didn't think the Treasury and the Department of Statistics were the right places to keep statistics. I beg your pardon. Motherhood, apple pie and the environment, and pirouetting by members opposite on the head of a pin to find reasons that sound nice but actually do harm, which is to vote against the environment, to vote against our children and our grandchildren who will inherit the mess that members opposite, wittingly or unwittingly, are making worse. Worse. because they are not using price mechanisms, they are not using objective data, they are not, to use the jargon of economics, internalising the externalities in the Crown accounts, and they are not living up to their own highest ideals of rational economic thought.
Order. The member's time has expired. Paul Foster-Bell.